In 1982, archaeologists excavated a shipwreck off the coast of Turkey that carried a cargo so diverse it rewrote history. The Uluburun ship, which sank around 1300 BCE, yielded 10 tons of copper from Cyprus, tin likely from Afghanistan, blue glass ingots from Egypt, ebony logs from Nubia, and a golden scarab bearing the name of an Egyptian queen. The copper and tin were the essential raw materials for bronze, revealing long-distance trade routes that supplied entire civilizations. The glass ingots pointed to an early glass industry with origins in Egypt. And the scarab itself linked this ship to the courts of pharaohs. This single vessel had transported goods from at least 7 different cultures across the Mediterranean and beyond. It demonstrated that ancient globalization was not a metaphor but a commercial reality, with international supply chains that would rival any modern shipping operation. Uluburun is just one example of how shipwrecks have forced historians to reconsider entire eras of the past. Maritime archaeology has evolved from a hunt for treasure into a rigorous scientific discipline that treats each sunken vessel as a time capsule. These accidental time capsules preserve evidence of trade, technology, and daily life that land-based archaeology rarely provides. Unlocking them is the key to understanding how ancient peoples connected across oceans. 18 specific wrecks have been pivotal in reshaping our knowledge of ancient seafaring, trade, technology, and cultural exchange. So how do archaeologists even locate these sites, and what methods have they developed to extract such extraordinary stories from the ocean floor? Our journey begins with the oldest known shipwreck. In 1975, a sponge diver off the island of Dokos spotted ancient pottery scattered across the seafloor at about 20 meters depth. He had found the oldest known shipwreck in the world, dating to around 2700 BCE. No hull remained, no metal, no organic material, only hundreds of broken clay pots, saucer boats, bowls, and storage jars typical of the early Helladic Roman II period. These were the cargo of a merchant vessel that sank while plying Aegean trade routes centuries before the Minoan palaces rose in Crete. By analyzing the pottery styles, archaeologists realized the jars came from different production centers across the Greek mainland and islands. The Dokos wreck contained no spectacular treasure, but it carried proof that maritime trade networks already connected distant communities at the dawn of the Bronze Age. A pile of shattered pottery rewrote the timeline of ancient seafaring. The Dokos wreck proved that trade existed, but the Uluburun wreck, discovered just 7 years later, proved that trade was global. In 1982, a sponge diver off Turkey's Kos Peninsula surfaced with a strange metal ingot in his net. He had found a shipwreck at 45 meters depth that would rewrite everything we thought we knew about the late Bronze Age. The cargo was staggering. Over 10 tons of pure copper ingots shaped like oxides were stacked in the hull. Next to them lay 1 ton of tin, the first solid evidence for where the tin that made Bronze Age bronze actually came from. But the Uluburun carried far more: Canaanite jars full of olive oil, wine, and resin for perfume, raw glass ingots in cobalt blue and turquoise, elephant ivory and hippopotamus teeth, ebony logs from Africa, and a gold scarab bearing the name of Queen Nefertiti of Egypt. Excavation took 11 seasons, from 1984 to 1994. Archaeologists used a grid system to map every single artifact in place, recording each position with the same care you would use on land. It was one of the first deep-water excavations conducted at this scale, and it set a new standard. The copper ingots were traced to Cyprus, The tin was linked to sources in Central Asia, possibly Afghanistan. The glass came from Egypt and Mesopotamia. The resin from the Canaanite jars was analyzed chemically and confirmed what the jars contained: pistachio resin used as perfume base or medicine. The Uluburun wreck didn't just contain a supermarket of Bronze Age goods. It redrew the map of ancient connectivity. It showed that a single ship could carry products from at least 7 different cultures, linking the Aegean, the Near East, Egypt, and even Central Asia centuries before the Classical era. But despite the wealth of cargo, the ship itself left a mystery. Who actually sailed this vessel and who owned the goods? That question would remain unanswered until archaeologists turned their attention to another wreck lying not far along the same coast. That wreck was the Cape Gelidonya ship, and it wasn't just another cargo. It was the wreck that founded underwater archaeology itself. Discovered in 1954 off the Turkish coast, it lay at a manageable depth of about 28 meters. But for years, no trained archaeologist had ever excavated a submerged wreck. That changed in 1960 when a young archaeologist named George Bass took charge. Bass was just 28 years old, and he had to invent almost everything from scratch. How to map artifacts on the seafloor using a grid of PVC pipes, how to lift heavy objects using air-filled lift bags, how to photograph each item in place before moving it. He even used a pressurized air drill to break through concreted layers. The ship itself dated to around 1200 BC, and its cargo was smaller than the Uluburun's. It carried copper and tin ingots, the same raw materials for bronze, but far fewer of them. Yet the real discovery was a tiny detail. One of the copper ingots bore the carved image of a scorpion. That scorpion was likely a merchant's mark, a brand, allowing us to trace ownership thousands of years later. Cape Gelidonya proved that underwater archaeology could be done with scientific rigor, not just salvage. Bass would go on to train an entire generation, and every grid laid on a wreck since then traces back to that first pioneering season. Off Cyprus in 1965, a sponge diver spotted a pile of ancient pottery on the seabed near Kyrenia. Archaeologists found the entire lower hull of a Greek merchant ship had survived, preserved under sand for more than 2,000 years. That was the Kyrenia wreck, dating to around 300 BC, and it became the first ancient ship ever fully excavated, lifted, reconstructed, and exhibited for the public. Michael Katsev led the excavation in 1968 and 1969. The wood was waterlogged and fragile, so every piece had to be recorded, wrapped, and raised. Over 75% of the original hull was recovered, enough to reconstruct the ship's shape in full detail. Inside, the cargo told an everyday story. 400 amphorae that had held wine, almonds still found in their staves with skins intact, and a hoard of coins that pinned the sinking to 294 BC. That gave historians a precise snapshot of a late classical merchant. Today, visitors to Kyrenia Castle walk through a full-scale reconstruction of that ship, standing where the crew stood, seeing the planks and framing that lay beneath the sea for 2 millennia. The Kyrenia wreck proved that ancient hulls could survive and that archaeology could recreate a ship in its original form. The Kyrenia wreck proved that a hull could survive. But a few decades earlier and a few hundred miles west, sponge divers off the Greek island of Antikythera kicked up a cloud of silt in 1900 and found something far stranger. They surfaced clutching pieces of bronze and marble, arms, legs, a head, fragments of statues scattered across a slope at 43 meters. The Greek Navy dove the site the following year in one of the first major underwater recoveries ever attempted. Hard hat divers, barely able to see, pulled up life-sized marble figures, a bronze philosopher with inlaid eyes, and a lump of corroded bronze that broke apart in their hands. For decades, that lump sat ignored in the National Museum in Athens, assumed to be a piece of a clock or a mechanical toy. Then, in the 1950s, a British historian named Derek de Solla Price photographed it and saw gear wheels. The Antikythera mechanism, as it became known, turned out to be a bronze astronomical computer built around 100 BC. Inside a wooden frame, 30 precisely cut gears meshed to track the sun, the moon, and the positions of the planets. It predicted eclipses, calculated the phases of the moon, and even dialed in the dates of major Panhellenic games. Nothing like it appears in any surviving text from antiquity. The next known device with comparable complexity dates to the 14th century. Modern X-ray and CT scans have since mapped nearly every tooth and inscription. The mechanism is Egyptian in its calendar, Greek in its language, and uses mathematical models that combine Babylonian astronomy with Hellenistic engineering. It came from a ship that had been carrying luxury goods and art from the Greek world to Rome around 70 to 60 BC. The ship itself was a floating museum of plundered Hellenistic treasures. But the mechanism was no trophy. It was a working instrument, and its presence on board suggests that the line between science and trade in the ancient world was far thinner than historians had assumed. That discovery forced a re-evaluation of ancient technology. The Greeks did not just theorize about the cosmos, they built a machine to measure it. While the Antikythera mechanism was rewriting the story of ancient technology, another shipwreck was quietly launching a different kind of revolution. In 1907, sponge divers off the coast of Tunisia discovered a mound of marble columns and bronze statues lying at 40 meters. This was the Modia shipwreck, a Roman vessel that had gone down around 90 BC while carrying a staggering load of looted Greek art. The man who led the excavation was Alfred Merlin, a French archaeologist who understood that diving could be more than salvage. He strapped on a heavy copper helmet, had air pumped down from the surface, and descended to document the site. Those hard hat dives marked the first time an archaeologist had personally inspected a wreck underwater. Merlin insisted on recording where each object lay. It was a small but crucial step toward systematic mapping. The cargo itself was a revelation. Over 60 marble columns, bronze statues, marble sculptures, ornate furniture, and even a bronze bed. This was not a merchant ship carrying ordinary goods. It was a Roman ship filled with plundered masterpieces, heading for a wealthy patron's villa. The sinking was likely a storm, but the wreck preserved a snapshot of Roman art collecting at its most extravagant. Among the finds was a bronze statue of a boy with a goose, now in the Bardo Museum in Tunis. It survived 2,000 years underwater, recovered by men in brass helmets who were inventing a new kind of archaeology as they went. While Alfred Merlin was pioneering deep diving at Modia, the next challenge was already emerging. In 1950, off the coast of Albenga in northwestern Italy, a Roman wreck was spotted at 42 meters. That depth pushed beyond the limits of conventional gear. Visual inspection was one thing, but excavating sediment at that depth required something new. Enter Nino Lamboglia, an Italian archaeologist who, from 1955 to 1957, deployed an airlift system, a pipe sucking up sand and mud like a reverse vacuum. It was crude but brilliant, allowing Lamboglia to clear the site and reach the cargo. And what a cargo it was! Thousands of wine amphorae of the Dressel I type made along the Tyrrhenian coast of Italy. The ship itself was estimated at 24 meters long, capable of carrying roughly 6,000 amphorae. That's an industrial-scale operation. The Albenga wreck gave archaeologists their first clear look at just how vast the Roman wine trade really was, and proved that with the right technology, even deep wrecks could yield their secrets. Just a few years after the Albenga excavation, another Roman wreck surfaced that would shift the focus from cargo volume to shipbuilding itself. In 1967, off the coast of southern France near the Giens Peninsula, a diving instructor spotted amphorae scattered across the seabed at about 18 meters. What followed, under the direction of archaeologist Andrei Kyrenia from 1972 to 1979, became a landmark study in Roman naval architecture. The Madrague de Giens wreck was carrying up to 6,000 wine amphorae, some filled with Italian wine, others with a prized vintage from the Greek island of Kos. But the real revelation was the hull. Enough of the wooden structure survived for Kyrenia's team to examine how the ship had been built. They found clear evidence of frame-first construction. The skeleton of the ship was erected before the outer planks were attached. That contradicted the older shell-first method used by earlier Mediterranean shipwrights and showed that Roman builders had developed a more efficient, stronger technique. The ship measured about 27 meters long with a cargo capacity of roughly 300 tons. The wood analysis identified species like elm and oak, confirming local Italian sourcing. And inside the amphorae, traces of resin and pitch told researchers exactly how the wine was sealed and protected. Madrague de Giens didn't just confirm the scale of Roman commerce, it gave historians a blueprint of the ships that made that commerce possible. But a ship's cargo and construction are only as reliable as the method used to uncover them, and that method was about to be reinvented off the coast of Turkey. In 1961, George Bass, the same archaeologist who had pioneered underwater excavation at Cape Gelidonya, turned his attention to a Byzantine wreck lying near the small island of Yasiota at a depth of 36 meters. The ship had sunk around 625 AD, laden with thousands of amphorae, a small cargo of glass, a bronze steelyard balance, and a single gold coin of the Emperor Heraclius. But what made Yasiota revolutionary wasn't the cargo itself, it was how Bass excavated it. He laid down a permanent metal grid over the entire site, dividing the seabed into numbered squares. Every artifact was plotted on a map, photographed in place, and tagged before being lifted. Divers worked in teams, following a strict protocol that had never been applied underwater before. The gold coin gave the wreck a precise date. The hull remains, though fragmentary, revealed Byzantine shipbuilding techniques, but the lasting legacy of Yasiota was the grid system itself. It turned underwater archaeology from a grab-and-go operation into a credible science. From that point on, excavation meant documentation first, recovery second, and that discipline opened the door to recovering even the most fragile cargoes. That same meticulous approach allowed George Bass to tackle one of the most fragile cargoes ever found underwater. In 1973, a sponge diver spotted amphorae scattered across a shallow reef off Serse Lamoni on Turkey's southern coast. Bass and his team returned in 1977 and spent 3 seasons excavating a small merchant ship that had sunk around 1025 AD. The wreck measured only about 15 meters, but its cargo was extraordinary. More than 3 tons of glass, not finished vessels alone, but raw chunks and broken cullet, glass destined for recycling. Alongside these were hundreds of intact glass bowls, beakers, and bottles, many with delicate applied decorations. Chemical analysis traced the raw glass to Levantine sources, likely from the Fatimid Caliphate, while the finished pieces showed styles mixing Islamic and Byzantine influences. The ship itself was probably sailing from a Syrian or Egyptian port to the Byzantine capital when it went down. What made Serse Lamoni so valuable was not just the quantity of glass, but the way it was recovered. Because Bass and his team used the same painstaking grid system perfected at Yasiota, they could lift even the thinnest shards intact and reconstruct the original forms. The wreck proved that glass was a major trade commodity, not a luxury item, and that medieval workshops recycled material on an industrial scale. It gave us a snapshot of an entire economic network preserved in shards. From the delicate glass of Serse Lamoni, we pivot north to a very different kind of wreck, one that was no accident. In 1956, work crews dredging the shallow waters of Roskilde Fjord in Denmark struck timbers. What they found was not a single shipwreck but 5. A deliberate barrier sunk around 1042 AD to block an enemy channel. Archaeologists excavated the site in 1962, and the scale of the discovery was staggering. The 5 vessels represented every major category of Viking ship. A sleek longship built for war, a deep-hulled gnar for ocean crossings, a smaller cargo carrier, and 2 other specialized types. Together, they gave researchers a complete catalogue of Viking naval engineering, from the light, fast raiding vessel to the sturdy trader that could cross the North Atlantic. Lifting the waterlogged oak was only half the challenge. The timbers were treated with polyethylene glycol, or PEG, a waxy polymer that replaces water in the cell structure, preventing shrinkage and cracking. This conservation method, pioneered on these ships, became the gold standard for preserving waterlogged wood worldwide. Once treated, the 5 hulls were reconstructed in the Viking Ship Museum in Roskilde, where visitors can walk around a full-scale version of the longship Havhingston, the Sea Stallion. In 2007, a replica of that ship sailed from Denmark to Dublin, proving the accuracy of the reconstruction. The Shipwrecks did not just preserve 5 boats. They gave us a living knowledge of how Vikings built, sailed, and lived by the sea. From the living knowledge of Viking ships, we move a few centuries forward and a short distance south to a riverbank in northern Germany. In 1962, workers digging a new harbour near Bremen struck a massive wooden hull. What they uncovered was the best preserved medieval merchant ship ever found. The Bremen cog, built around 1380. Unlike the clinker-built Viking longships with overlapping planks, this cog was carvel-built, planks laid edge to edge over a sturdy frame, giving it a smooth, strong hull. Its flat bottom and shallow draft made it ideal for navigating the silty estuaries and shallow ports of the North Sea, the heart of the Hanseatic trade network. The ship was raised in one piece, a rare feat in itself, and its oak timbers were dated precisely by tree rings to 1378. Interestingly, the cargo hold was nearly empty, just a few ropes and coins. But that was the point. The ship itself was the treasure. Its design told archaeologists exactly how Hanseatic merchants moved bulk goods like grain, timber, and salt across northern Europe. Reconstructed and now displayed at the German Maritime Museum in Bremerhaven, the Bremen cog is a time capsule of medieval shipbuilding, showing us not just the vessel, but the commercial empire it served. Gracedieu, built for King Henry V of England around 1418, was a massive clinker-built warship over 400 tons, one of the largest of its age. Laid up after the king's death, it settled into the mud of the River Hamble and was forgotten until the 1970s. Excavation revealed overlapping oak planks, iron rivets, and a hull designed for size rather than speed. Instead of raising the wreck, archaeologists chose to leave it on the seabed as a test of in-situ preservation. They monitored pH, waterlogging, and microbial activity, learning how to stabilize a wooden hull without moving it. Gracedieu became a case study proving that sometimes the best way to protect a ship is to let it rest where it sank, a quiet pioneer of conservation science. Henry Roman VIII flagship Mary Rose capsized in front of him during the Battle of the Solent in 1545. The ship sank with hundreds aboard into the mud. For over 4 centuries, it lay sealed by silt, preserving organic materials. In 1971, marine archaeologists Alexander McKee and Margaret Rule led a team to pinpoint the wreck. The excavation became a training ground for modern underwater archaeology. Divers mapped every square meter using a grid system adapted from Yasiota. They lifted thousands of objects: longbows and arrows, leather boots, wooden tankards, pewter plates, bronze cannons, navigation tools, musical instruments, and the bones of the crew. Some skeletons showed arrow injuries, revealing that archers were also casualties. The biggest challenge came with raising the hull. On 11 October 1982, an estimated 60 million people watched live as the lifting frame broke the surface with a section of the starboard side. That moment transformed public awareness of maritime archaeology, but the real work had only begun. The waterlogged wood needed stabilization. The Mary Rose Trust pioneered a conservation program using polyethylene glycol, the same synthetic wax used on the Roskilde Viking ships but on a far larger scale. The hull was kept under a constant spray of PEG solution for years before freeze-drying, a process that continued until 2020. Analysis of crew bones and teeth revealed their diet, injuries, and origins. The bronze guns offered insights into early modern metallurgy. The ship itself became a laboratory for conservation science. While Grace taught archaeologists how to preserve a wreck in place, the Mary Rose showed them how to bring one back to life. Just a few decades before the Mary Rose was raised, another warship had already rewritten the rules of underwater preservation. In 1628, Sweden launched its most ambitious flagship, the Vasa, a towering symbol of national power adorned with hundreds of carved sculptures. On its maiden voyage, with dignitaries watching from shore, the ship sailed less than a nautical mile before a gust of wind caught its sails, causing it to heel over and sink in full view of Stockholm Harbour. 30 people died, but the shallow, cold, brackish water preserved the wreck perfectly. For over 3 centuries, the Vasa lay in mud. In 1956, engineer Anders Franzén located the wreck, and in 1961, the ship was raised largely intact. Over 95% of the original oak hull survived, along with thousands of artifacts, tools, clothing, coins, and even crew remains that told of diet and disease. The hull itself was covered in hundreds of ornate wooden sculptures, a 3-dimensional piece of Baroque art frozen mid-sentence. The conservation challenge was immense. For 17 years, conservators sprayed the hull with polyethylene glycol, slowly replacing water in the wood with stabilizing wax, then dried it in a controlled chamber. The process turned the Vasa into a stable monument. Today it sits in its own purpose-built museum in Stockholm, the most visited in Scandinavia, where visitors walk around a complete 17th-century warship 3 decks high. The Vasa proved that a nearly intact shipwreck is a primary document, revealing exactly how a ship was built and why it sank. Analysis identified the fatal design flaw. The Vasa was dangerously top-heavy with too little ballast and too many heavy guns. The king had demanded more firepower, and the shipbuilders complied, ignoring basic stability. The Vasa was not just a time capsule of Baroque craftsmanship. It was a lesson in political pressure overriding engineering reality. The Batavia offers a darker lesson about human nature and the role of archaeology in separating fact from legend. In 1629, the Dutch East India Company ship ran aground on the Houtman Abrolhos Islands off Western Australia. What followed was not a survival story. It was a mutiny and massacre. A faction of survivors turned on the others, killing over 100 men, women, and children. The wreck was discovered in 1963, and a major excavation by the Western Australian Museum in the 1970s set out to recover not just treasure but the truth. Archaeologists found silver coins, bricks, and the remains of a stone portico. The Batavia was carrying that masonry as a trade gift for the Dutch East Indies. More important, they found physical evidence of the massacre site itself. The soil held the bones and personal effects of the victims, confirming historical accounts that had long been dismissed as sensational. The hull timbers were raised and studied systematically. A full-scale replica was later built in Lelystad, Netherlands, allowing historians to test how the vessel sailed and why it could not escape the reef. Archaeology did not just confirm a known story here, it validated a suppressed history and gave silent victims a voice through the objects they carried. Urban archaeology delivered an equally transformative discovery. In 2004, workers digging the Marmaray Tunnel beneath Istanbul uncovered the ancient harbour of Theodosius, covered by centuries of sediment. Inside lay 37 Byzantine ships from the 9th to 11th centuries, preserved in oxygen-poor mud. This was not a single wreck but a fleet of small merchant vessels, some still carrying their final cargoes. Amphorae of wine and oil, glassware, and the remains of a dog that likely sailed with its owner. The ships were abandoned or scuttled at the end of their working lives, their gradual covering by sediment preserving them in exceptional condition. Dendrochronology gave precise felling dates for the timbers, allowing archaeologists to place each vessel in its historical context. Wood analysis revealed a shift from shell-first to skeleton-first construction, a transition that would influence Mediterranean shipbuilding for centuries. The cargoes confirmed trade connections with the Black Sea, the Levant, and North Africa, showing Constantinople as a hub of exchange. Many of the 37 ships were raised and conserved. Today they are displayed in the Yenikapi Museum, forming the largest collection of medieval shipwrecks ever assembled. This harbour, frozen in its final days, rewrote the history of Byzantine maritime life. While Yenikapi preserved ships through sediment burial, the Black Sea offers a different kind of preservation. In 2018, the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project Black Sea Yenikapi announced a discovery at 2,000 meters depth. A remote-operated vehicle's lights revealed a Greek merchant ship, 23 meters long, sitting upright on the seabed with its mast still standing and its rudder and rigging intact after 24 centuries. This is the oldest intact ancient shipwreck ever found. The Black Sea has a unique property. Below about 150 meters, the water lacks oxygen. This anoxic layer prevents wood-boring organisms and bacterial decay, so the ship, which sank around 400 BC, never deteriorated. The hull, planks, and even ropes remained preserved. Its cargo of amphorae, likely from Sinope or Chios, still lay in neat stacks, indicating a merchant bound for a Greek colony on the Black Sea coast. What makes this wreck transformative is not just its condition but what it represents. Traditional archaeology would require excavation, but here the preservation is so complete that researchers can study construction, rigging, and cargo without moving any pieces. The ROV images alone provide a degree of analysis impossible even a decade ago. This discovery proves that deep-sea technology has advanced enough to document ancient ships without disturbing them. It draws on techniques seen in previous wrecks: careful recording from Yasiota, deep water lifting from Modia, conservation science from the Mary Rose, and large-scale projects like Yenikapi. The Black Sea wreck shows that the ocean's deepest anoxic zones can preserve ships virtually intact, providing an unparalleled view of ancient seafaring. We began with a chance find by a sponge diver and ended with a ship preserved 2 kilometers down, discovered by a remotely operated vehicle. That journey from Dokos to the Black Sea spans more than 4,000 years of human history and 60 years of maritime archaeology. In between, 18 shipwrecks transformed the way we study the past. Each one taught something essential: Bronze Age trade routes, ancient engineering, the scale of empires, and the stories preserved in wood and cargo. Maritime archaeology evolved from salvage to systematic science, and the ocean's deepest anoxic zones now let us study an ancient ship without lifting a single plank. But the real significance of these wrecks goes beyond technique. The Uluburun ship, discovered by a sponge diver, opened our eyes to a world of interconnected trade where goods from a dozen cultures crossed the Mediterranean. That single ship forced historians to rewrite the story of late Bronze Age exchange, and that pattern repeated with every wreck we examined. The Yasiota wreck gave us the first rigorous underwater excavation. The Madrague revealed deep water lifting. The Merry Rose taught conservation science. The Yenikapi ships showed how to preserve an entire ancient harbor. And the Black Sea wreck demonstrated that even a wooden vessel can survive intact for millennia in anoxic depths, granting researchers a view of ancient shipbuilding untouched by time. These 18 wrecks are not just sunken ships. They are accidental time capsules that force us to rewrite narratives about who our ancestors were, how they traded, built, and lived. Maritime archaeology is not about treasure. It is about recovering the shared human story hidden beneath the waves. Every one of these discoveries changed something we thought we knew, and the ocean still holds thousands more. So here is my question for you. Which of these shipwrecks do you think changed history most? And if you could dive to anyone, which would it be? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest discoveries and the science behind them. Every video uncovers a new layer of the past.